So, this conference will be grabado, se me fue la palabra en inglés, pero anyway, recorded, okay. So we have to give it in English, and I'm glad all of you are here. Pleased to have you. We expected a lot more, but I'm glad for the people who did join us. Today, this is the part one of a three-part seminar series dealing with writing for a biomedical publication. And this first part, we're going to overview the beginnings of trying to write a manuscript. And I am Dr. Dina Hallman, and you will be joined by Dra. Maria Gonzalez pretty soon. So, mira, esto no. ¿Qué le doy aquí? Pero le doy aquí, pero déjame ver. Keyboard, okay. Ajá. Sí, porque le quiero dar aquí, pero no sé. Okay. 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 A esto, a la ruedita. Okay. So we're going to start with talking about biomedical scientific publishing, and we're here, as the candle says, sharing. So why publish? Basically, new knowledge generated from scientific research must be communicated in order for it to be relevant. And then now, any scientist who has funds or grant money or foundation money, they have to share the findings with the external research community and to the public by law. So when you communicate, the most obvious and most common way is talking, right? Personal communication, but you can only talk to a few people. Public lectures and seminars are quite often given, but then you can't really critically evaluate all the validity of the results. So publication is the best way to do it and the most obvious way to give out the results. And then since 1665 it was the start of the professional scientific journal. It was called then the Philosophical Transaction of the Royal Society of London, and that's where they started what is a scientific journal and peer review. The concept was introduced by them. So publications are the primary channel for communication of knowledge, and also it's the best way to serve as an arbiter of the knowledge per se. This responsibility is shared among the authors, peer reviewers, editors, and the scientific community. So how? There's many ways you can publish, abstracts, case reports, so forth. But the full-length research publication is the best way. And it's since 1968, the Council of Biology Editors define what a research publication is, and they define it as the first written disclosure of new knowledge that would enable the reader to repeat exactly the experiments described, assess fully the observations reported, and evaluate the intellectual process involved. So these three aspects or elements gave way to the development of what we know the modern manuscript. Okay, so to be able to repeat the experiments, you really need a comprehensive, detailed methodology. You can't leave out special secrets or anything like Coca-Cola or McDonald's with their special ingredients. You really have to detail everything. To access the fully observations, you need a very detailed results section. You need the graphs, the charts, the tables, and full exposure of the hard data. And then to evaluate the intellectual process, that's your introduction, where you have the rationale, the scientific basis, justification, and the in-depth evaluation of all the existing body of knowledge. So I know this is the most dreaded part, but it's important. So what and when to publish, okay? As you see, the publish or perish category is very well known, right? So when to publish, it should be when it's the first written, obviously, it's the first written disclosure of new knowledge, and the advantage would be you get the credit for that new knowledge. And then later on, the relevance and importance will be known or be manifested with your citations. And then with this, obviously, it leads to, presentations at meetings, you're getting better grant support, academic promotion, and greater compensation. And everybody wants this, right? So the disadvantage to be the first to publish is that you can't effectively mine. You found something new, you want to share it really fast, but then you can't really get into all the different aspects of that discovery. Because once it's out there, once it's published, anyone can benefit from that information and will increase competition. So it's a fine line when to really publish it and when you lose control. But also, if you publish it too early and you haven't really confirmed all of the findings, you might have little oops, then you have to retract saying, okay, there was an error in this analysis or something didn't go well. So that's where you have to decide. According to what to publish, obviously manuscripts expect to have masses of data that can provide a comprehensive answer to the important scientific question. So this is, the long, the really bulky information or publication. But at sometimes really smaller studies that are well encompassed and really succinct but are very well done can merit publication on their own. And this is very important for you young investigators, that you really need to start to build up what peer review productivity. So either a small study well done is worthwhile to publish then and there. But then as you become a senior author, it's better to have a more comprehensive publication under your belt. So what to publish is obviously the best definition would be new, previously undisclosed knowledge that has been obtained by rigorous application of the scientific method and has relevance to an identifiable intellectual community, provided that there is absolute confidence in their reproducibility and statistically validity. So this is all the good stuff, the positive stuff. But a word that sometimes even negative findings should be published, especially if they're from well-controlled clinical trials. I know that it's really hard to find these studies in the manuscripts because nobody likes them. So you did all this work and then it comes out negative, but it shouldn't be. And so Gupta at one time wrote a letter, a manuscript saying negative results need to airing too, because if you fail to even publish these negative results, it will give a negative bias. When you do an overview of all the data or all the information out there, you only see the positive result, but you need the negative as well. And this is especially important because you don't want other future clinical trials to repeat the same stuff. And this is from an oncology point of view, because I see some oncology fellows here, to the story of malignant lymphoma clinical trials is a very good example of this. In the 1970s is when it started for malignant lymphoma called CHOP, Cytoxan, Adriamycina, oncomycin, and prednisone. And then during the 80s, a whole bunch of people, it was a mad race, came up with these different regimens to treat the lymphoma. And they were really increasingly complex with a lot of chemotherapies, drugs, and very difficult and even very toxic to some patients. But then at one time, a consortium of all the different groups of giving clinical trials, they decided, let's really validate if it's better than the traditional CHOP. They did that, and guess what? CHOP it was easier, better, and less toxic than all these others, Makeup B, and I actually used them. They were fun to give, but they were very, very difficult, okay? And so we went back to CHOP and still continue with CHOP, okay? That's a regimen. So you really have to, and it was this negative study saying that CHOP is, that all the new stuff is not better than CHOP, what gave us, the oncologists, the way to continue treating up to this day malignant lymphoma. So that's important. And of course, even to basic scientists, you don't want to keep on, if nobody published that this doesn't work, then other people will try to do it and waste time and resources, right? So the International medical journal committee for medical journal editors at one time stated that editors should publish any carefully done study of an important question relevant to the readers, whether or not the outcomes are statistically significant. So, because if you fail to do this, it will cause an important publication bias. So if a journal does not like your negative results, try an open access journal, and they're a little bit more lenient. So do that. Don't feel that your results weren't good because they came out non-significant. If the work was done, it was good, it was a good work, then try to publish it, maybe a different method or journal, but please try to do it. So another concept regarding to what to publish, it's called salami slicing. You can look it up. It looks funny, you know, but it's what it's known as. And this is when you have a really large study and collective data. It's sliced up to many individual components. And they're classified as the least publishable unit, or LPU, prior to the publication. Journals especially like to frown upon it. They just call them salami publications because they're the set of papers having the same population, methods, and research question. They don't like it. And actually, they spoke up at one time expressing against it. And this editor said that one of the decisions made to evaluate the least publishable unit criterion is, does this manuscript contain enough data, knowledge, or insight to warrant publication? Okay. Another journal, the Annals of Rheumatic Disease, said they tried to judge if it would be better to have one paper involving two different papers, or have them divided up to two. And from Nature Materials, they said that authors who fail to disclose all the relevant work deny the referees and editors the opportunity to assess the true extent of the contribution of the broader body of research. And the New England Journal was even harsher, saying that multiple reports of the same observation can overemphasize the importance of the findings, overburden busy reviewers, fill the medical literature with inconsequential material, and distort the academic reward system. So they were really, really harsh. But in favor of this, some authors have wrote that it's better to have the least publishable unit. It's easier. The information is easily quantifiable, and it helps in citation. You get the information more rapidly because you don't have to wait till the whole data go through all the analysis. And then if a little component was given up front, then the feedback can be received to the authors to correct on the future information to be given out later. And what you will all like, if it was divided up in the little salami slices, as I said, then you have multiple opportunities for different first authors. You know, first authorship is a very important goal to achieve. So when you think about salami slicing your information, be sure to focus on the quality, not the quantity. Not that you really want to say, okay, I get 10 papers out of this. No, but each and every one, does it have quality, yes or no? And try to combine them if not. So this is doing that, considering the LPU. This is one perturbation is that publishing essentially the same data in multiple formats and blending with incremental new data. It's something that what the editors really frown upon. But a study was done, and they looked at different journals and everything, and they revealed that at least 13.6 duplicates were found in the literature at that time. This was published in 2001 with same findings, same authors in different journals. So it is done. It's not nice, but it is done. And then they followed 129 original publications, and about 50% of them had suffered subsequent salami slicing. So it's there, okay? But then one thing you have to really be aware of, that if you republish the already published materials, even if they're by the same authors, this would be considered an act of plagiarism if you present it as new and original. So what you have to do, it was presented before, and you cite it, you reference it, although it's the same author or the same group and so forth, okay? So let's look at the environmental literature. This is something that's very tedious, but it's very important. The review of the existing literature is required before you start your research question, continuously throughout the course, and very importantly, sometimes I don't really see it done, is just before the submission of the manuscript. Because if you really want to assure this new and original, you have to do the work. Sometimes I see that work takes like 3 years or so forth, and when they finally write it up, they say the most recent results was this, and they talk about it. When you look it up, there was even more recent results. So it's funny to see something to be published in 2017, and the last work evaluation was done, or looking up the literature was done in 2012. So make sure right before you send it up for submission, do a quick research and make sure that you have the most recent data, or you talk about the most recent data up to that point. And actually, some journals even put it, write it down that it was received on that date, and then they publish it later on. So you're amenable to, you should strive to the date you submit it, have it up to date to that date at least. Okay, so you have the different databases that you all know of, the Medline, the PubMed, which is more comprehensive, and then privately supported databases that all of you, I think, will be receiving the PDF of these slides, so you can have that for future reference. And then another way to look at an area that you're interested in is to go through the funded grant databases. So the PubMed Central now receives all the different publications related to a different study that they gave funds to. And you can look up the reporter database, and there's Grantscape database. At least you have the investigators, not the publications. But even ERA Commons can help you out, look for with the like this search engine to find out material. You submitted an abstract or something, they look for something similar, and it'll help define the areas in which you're interested and see who else is doing that, what, and where. So this is the importance of commitment. I think this is the worst of all, because writing is very hard work. So you have to be able to be a successful investigator and publisher, you have to keep up with your own field, and then sometimes look up the research in trends in related fields, because maybe you can adopt something related, you can adopt it to your area, and you're going to be the first to know and to think about it if you do so. But you have to really identify long-term their career objectives and in a specific discipline, because you really cannot have a whole bunch of different interests, okay? You would be, the jack of all trades and the master of none, because you really have to really narrow down. I know it's hard when you're younger because you're interested in everything, and I was like that, I guess, until yesterday, because I like everything, but then you really can't do it. So you have to define what is your area, and that's the area you're going to follow through, okay? Because if you start, I know when you're young that you might get different things to publish about, but if you start scattering around your publications, it will look like what? Lack of focus. And that's the least what you want someone who reviews your bibliography to think, that you're not focused, okay? So become familiar with your field, then find the relevant journals, their editors, reviewers, and who publishes in them, and then get to know them. And that's your networking, okay? The key to success in many areas is networking. Find out who they are. Whenever you go on a trip, and look up that person. Now, who is we going to Pennsylvania? Who's in UPenn that I know I would be interested in? Pay them a visit. And usually they're just, they're willing to talk to you and be available. So I have funny stories of my son who's very out there and outgoing. He went to a researcher, and he said he wanted to meet because he was doing something he was interested. And then he just said, "Can I talk to you?" And the guy said, oh, yes, but who are you? And he was a Chinese, obviously. He said, who are you? And he said, oh, and then he presented himself, and he became a very good friends with that guy. So it's just, really going out there and talking to people and get to know them. And that I'm sure they will be happy to help. Okay, another opportunity or another thing that you might consider to become really familiar with your field is seeking opportunities to review manuscripts submitted to a journal of interest. Get to know them. Editors are always looking for qualified and conscientious reviewers, so gain access to the members of the journal board, editorial boards, volunteer to the editor or the associate editor, but be sure you're at least qualified because you're having several manuscripts or as a first author or a correspondent author, so you're qualified in that regard. And then if you get in, do an outstanding job. Have senior colleagues to look at it before you send it out. Return them really promptly because they will like it. And doing this will give you a different perspective than of an author. And actually, in the scientific writing unit that Maria and I work at, looking at different papers, I find them really interesting, all of them. It's you get to vision them in a different way, and it gives you a different perspective on how to write and how to come across a message. Because basically, this is communication, how to give a message and improve on that message you're giving. And then if you do well in that manuscript, at least if you submit a new manuscript in the future, the editor will be on your favor because I know that that's a very good reviewer. I'm going to listen to them. Okay, so you have that on your bag. Okay, time is the rate limiting for success. This is an interesting study by Weber and that published in JAMA that they followed different authors of abstracts that were submitted to a medical meeting, and they followed them for 5 years to determine if these results were published in a primary publication in a peer-reviewed journal. So they found out that 50% were published, but of the other half that did not, 42% indicated that they did not have enough time. Other reasons were given as belief that the journal would be unlikely to accept it, results not important enough, not worth the trouble, or other investigators had similar results. And all of these excuses, what it shows lack of enthusiasm. They lost interest, okay? So once you have the sufficient data generated for publication, you should write it with a high priority immediately. It shows that enthusiasm decreases as the time elapses, and the medium of the date of the time from the date of completion until publishing is usually about 70 days. So we're talking basically 2 months, okay? That's really fast. So it's the best way to do it because after 6 or 7 months, everybody gets disinterested. You find that the data is no longer fun or not relevant or not important, or you really don't want to do it, okay? So when you're talking about managing your time, the best way is to establish a habit or routine, regular time to commit to it. All these activities associated with publishing, like writing, searching the literature, editing drafts, and all of this should be scheduled ahead of time. You have to treat it like something else, other commitments you have. If you have to teach from that hour to this hour, set aside the time for this. If you have several meetings, you want to interrupt a class or you want to interrupt a meeting because you were doing something else, right? So this has to be some time you set aside and no one can distract you. And find a time where you can really be on your own and doing it. You have to block it off. And something that's really useful, you see this little timer over here that looks like a tomato. I don't know if you're aware of the Pomodoro technique. How many are aware of that? It's really good. Okay. I used it on recommendation of my son. Again, I put it on, and it really helps you. That TikTok really pushes you because it's so annoying. You put it on Google, and you hear the tick-tock, tick-tock. and you have 25 minutes to get through something and really do it really fast, 5 minutes break, and then you go 25 minutes again. And it really pushes you because that sometimes you get distracted, right? If you don't hear something, you get distracted. Sometimes people use music, but I find I can't use music because then I get more interested in the music than what I'm doing. So I need, that's really bad. But then, I start singing, oh my God, I lost track. Okay, so this was, I found, of all the things I've tried, and believe me, I've tried many, this is the best because you hear the TikTok and it really pushes you through. So be sure that it's very important to have a top priority as a researcher to block off time to do your publishing. So, okay, so now an important issue is going to be given by Doctora Maria Gonzalez on deciding your target journal.
Thank you all for being here again. So one of the most important aspects of publishing is actually choosing the right journal. Everybody wants to knock it out of the park and have a science paper, PNAS paper, but not always you'll have enough data for a publication in one of these prestigious journals. And today we're going to briefly discuss how you can analyze the options available to choose the best one for you. Sorry. Okay, so when I choose a journal, and I find this helps a lot, I make a little table. First thing I do is I look in the literature and I find where other colleagues that study my area are publishing. And then you can start making a list of possible journals. Another tool that I found as a recommendation of a colleague is the Jane Journal Finder. I find this is very helpful for when I have no idea where I'm going to publish this. Let me see, it's not that way, sorry. So when you have let me go back. So when you have Jane Journal Finder, you can either put the title of your paper, you could put the abstract of your paper, you could look for authors that publish similar themes, and this is the output you'll have. So when you look, it'll give you a list. In this list, it'll have some sort of metric in terms of impact factor, which we'll discuss in a little bit. It'll also have all the articles that have been published. You can click on Show Articles, and it'll tell you which articles have been published, the years have been published, and based on that, you can make a more educated decision of where you want to actually submit your paper. And you can start making your list. Sorry. So there are 4 aspects you should consider when choosing the correct journal. One is your audience. What's the scope of the journal? You have to look at the journal. You have to go get the scope. We'll discuss this in a bit later. But you actually want to think about who you want to read the paper. Is it more the epidemiologist? Then you would sort of look for more epi journals. Is it the basic scientist? Is it the clinician? You have to have this in your head so when you make the correct decision, you know that you're reaching the people you want to reach. You also have the other side of aspect of it that you can consider either a general journal, such as Virology +1, which encompasses a whole variety of subjects, or you could go more into a specialty journal that actually focuses on the area you're studying. Peer review. There's no question about this. You always want peer reviewed. There's lots of options right now to publish. Some of them promise to publish in less than a week. Be very wary. You always want your work peer reviewed. In terms of publishing, you also have to think about this. How much does it take for the journal to review your paper, to publish your paper? What's the average acceptance rate? You have to think about this as time. You're going to spend time writing this manuscript. You're going to spend time actually submitting it. It'll take a couple of hours. It'll take time for them to get back to you. But what happens? Usually you're not alone studying a subject. You have several other people which are competing with you studying the same subject. So you don't want to submit your paper to a journal that'll take forever to give you an answer, because then you can get scooped. And of course, there's impact. Everybody wants to publish in a higher impact journal. This should not be the only thing you consider, but it's not something you can't ignore. Also, you want to think about indexing. Is this available through PubMed? I would always recommend that you look at the indexing and it is on PubMed. If not, there's other ways to make it available through PubMed. But if it's already on PubMed, it's much easier for you. So in terms of target readership, how do you go to choose who do you want to target? So what is your message? What is the punchline? Who does it affect? Which field does it advance? Who is it important to? Also, consider your population. Is it Hispanics? Are you targeting disparities? Maybe you want to focus on journals that actually report findings on disparities. Do you have a particular model? Do you do a particular type of analysis? All of these things come together when you try to choose the optimal journal for your studies. In terms of general versus specialty journals, it's much easier to publish in a specialty journal. They'll be more familiar with what you're publishing, but it'll also depend on the impact of your findings. If you have your PNAS paper, definitely submit it to PNAS or Science or one of these top journals. But if you have other papers, maybe you should consider doing a search on possible specialty journals that could actually work out for you. But the main thing is that you should understand the scope of the journal. Once you know and understand the scope of the journal, then you'll decide which one is better for you. So how do you determine the scope of the journal? Usually it'll be available in the website. It will have several links. In this one, which is Gut, you go to About, and when you go to About, it'll tell you the aims and scope. So if you look clearly, I don't know if you could actually read, there's keywords that'll actually guide you to see if your work fits into what they want to publish. So when you look at the keywords, they say clinically oriented, clinical research, likely to impact clinical practice. If you have a basic science paper, this is not the journal for you. This type of analysis you should do with all the journals you consider. So you have the optimal chance of getting your paper accepted into this journal. But what about maybe it could be that the journal could be interested? Sometimes it's not as easy as yes or no. It could be a gray area. That's actually happened to me. Usually you could get the editor's email on their website, write a brief email, and they'll be very quick to answer you. Usually they'll tell you, yes, we're interested, no, we're not, or maybe they'll even give you options that you can consider in one of the other journals in the publisher's spectrum. So what about peer review? I'm pretty sure everybody knows how peer review works, but just a brief overview. So a scientist studies something, then he writes something, then he submits the manuscript, the editor sends it to the reviewer sends it back to the editor, who sends the reviews back to the person, the scientist. The scientist makes the changes, he submits it back again, and it gets published. That's like normally what's done. You definitely want this to happen to all your papers. Not only are peer-reviewed journals a trusted form of scientific communication, it also gives you the peace of mind that an expert in the field actually saw your work, saw that it was good, gave you some input on how to make your manuscript better, and then it gets published. In terms of publishing, I briefly described that you should always consider this when you're submitting a manuscript. What is the average turnaround rate? What is the average acceptance rate? Why? I mean, I could give you, in this cartoon, there's a graduate student getting scooped. For all of you that don't know, if you don't publish novel research, you don't graduate. So for a graduate student, that would be terrible to get scooped. He would have to start again. But we don't want to get scooped. And not only that, you don't want to be submitting a paper back and forth for a year and a half. You usually want to try to make this a shorter amount of time so you can get all the information published and done. Where can you find this information? Some journals, such as Gut, this is actually an excerpt for Gut, give you exactly what you're looking for. The acceptance rate, the rejection rate, how long does it take to come to the first decision, time to the final decision. Some other journals will not have this information, but then you could always look up their papers. And when you look up their papers, in the top left hand usually, they'll tell you when it was submitted, and when it was accepted, and when it was published. And that could give you an idea of how much time it takes for this journal to actually review paper till it gets accepted. The other thing you could do is you could write the editor and ask. If you write to the bigger journals, it'll be very easy for them to answer these questions since they have these statistics, but other smaller journals may not have this information. But all of these tips you can look up and try to make a better decision when choosing a journal. In terms of impact factor is a measure that reflects the yearly average number of citations of the recent articles published in this journal. So how visible is this journal? Pretty much it's what this information is giving you. So for example, if you look towards the right-hand side where it has the formulas for Nature, so citations in 2013 and 2012 are divided by the publications in those 2 years, and that gives you the impact factor for 2014. So impact factor, although it was not invented for this, is usually used as a proxy for the relative importance of a journal in the field. But it should not be your only consideration because more specialized journals do have lower impact scores. This does not mean that they're not read, they're just read by the people in the field. And that's something you should sort of consider when you're looking at a journal to publish. So where can you find impact factors? Sometimes they're a little bit hard to find. You could either find it at the journal's website, you could do a Google search and sometimes it'll come up. You could also go to Web of Science and look at the journal citation reports, or you could ask the editorial team. All of this information, if you choose 5 candidate journals and put them in a table, that will help you make the best decision of where you should submit your paper. And the other thing you can consider, sometimes you absolutely know where you're going to submit your paper. My paper is going to Cancer. But you should always do this exercise because sometimes if it doesn't get accepted into Cancer, you already have a second journal you want to submit to, rather than having to look for a journal to submit to. So in terms of citations and impact, they go hand in hand. And this also goes hand in hand with indexing. You want your papers to be in the major databases. I would always recommend that it's indexed in PubMed. If it can't be in the main databases, it won't be found. And if it won't be found, it won't be cited. And that's definitely something you want to avoid. Other considerations are, how long has the journal been in existence? Younger journals that haven't been publishing for 3 years, 2 years, won't have impact factors. But it's generally easier to publish in these younger journals. It doesn't mean that these journals are not good, they're just new. And also with younger journals, maybe they won't be indexed in PubMed and Medline yet. And that could be something that you want to consider. At the end of the day, what you want to ultimately guide your decision is the overall quality of the journal's published articles. I always recommend that you look up some of the articles in the journal that you're considering, and if they're okay and they're good manuscripts, well, that gives you a good indication that it's a good journal. Beware of fraudulent and non-peer-reviewed journal. With the boom of open access journals, there's lots of journals that promise publishing in less than a week, and you should be wary because why are they so fast compared to other journals? What is going on? You should always have that in consideration. Another thing I want to discuss is public access to scientific publications. The NIH established the public access policy. The public access policy was based on the fact that NIH research money comes from the public, therefore the public should have access to this research. In 2005, it was established that in order to advance science and improve human health, all literature supported by the NIH should, it wasn't really enforced, it was more of a recommendation, should be open access. In 2008, it was actually made a requirement. Every scientist that has received direct funding from an NIH grant or a co-op agreement since 2008 has received direct funding from an NIH contract since April 7, 2008, or has been receiving funding from the intramural program or is an employee, has to have their research publicly available through PubMed Central. There's a link that'll help you. I just included the link because it's easier for the time that we have, but it gives you a step-by-step guide to see if you're compliant and how to comply with this rule. It'll give you step-by-step instructions on how you could submit your papers to PubMed Central. Sorry. So I briefly spoke about open access. There's a whole spectrum of open access journals. You have some open access journals where your article is open access from the time it was accepted. You have some that are open access after an embargo period time has trespassed. Others, you can actually request for them to be open access, but you have to pay a higher fee. I sort of wanted to discuss the pros and cons of open access. So when you think about the pros of open access, well, one thing you have to consider is that it reduces the permissions, the requirements, and eliminate barriers to make your manuscript open access, which is now an NIH requirement. Also, studies have shown that open access journals, manuscripts in these open access journals, have more citations because they're more readily available to the readers. The cons is that lots of open access journals are much more expensive. They have to make their money somehow. Before it was with subscriptions, now it's with submissions. And also, when you look at open access journals, there are so many right now that you really want to see each one and be vigilant about the quality of the manuscripts published, if they're peer-reviewed, if they're indexed, and try to see which are fraudulent journals. Examples of very successful open access journals are the PLOS journal family. There's PLOS Pathogen, PLOS One, a whole list of PLOS, and also the Biomed Central journal family. There's also a lot of BMC journals that you could also consider. Is there any question to this point? So now I'll leave you with Dr. Hallman once again, and she'll discuss co-authorship issues.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about something that a lot of people don't like to address, but it's important. Okay, co-authorship issues are very contentious and also divisive, and you know why? Because it's a big deal to have your name as a first author in something very important, an important discovery. It's a big deal, and sometimes a lot of authors fight over what number they are in a list of different journal authors there. So, but this is something that's more modern. And in 1885, most of the articles were single-authored. If someone wanted to write, you know, you have those past people who were very illustrious, and they wrote, and they wrote themselves. Then by 45, at least half of them continued to be single-authored, and by 75, none of them. So also, the numbers of authors have been increasing. As you see by each decade, by the 70s, you would probably have like 3 authors, and now in 2010, at least 4.8, so 15 authors, that's a lot, okay? And how do you sort it out is what we're going to learn a little bit today. Okay. So the issues, as because there's more people fight about them, so that are also increasing. A study that published in JAMA that's looked at the faculty issues that were brought at Harvard University to the Conflict Resolution Ombudsman related to co-authorships were found that from 91 to 92 were only 2%, but then in a couple of years increased to 11%. So, and some of the issues that were brought, examples that said that people will write about, is that although listed as an author, I never received the article, saw the reviewer's feedback, or signed off on the final document, and that happens a lot. Another issue expressed was, a fellow is demanding the first author position, but the contribution was primarily in implementing experiments, not in creating the design or writing, which is very important as well. And then another said that after I left my lab, I got no credit for the project on articles that used my work. So these are the frequent gripes that are going on. Another study also published in JAMA by Flanagan evaluate all of these authors and sort of like divided into two groups, with those that were considered honorary, that these were co-authors whose contributions in the opinion of the other co-authors did not merit the distinction or the honor, and the ghosts were those who should have been mentioned or should merit co-authorship and were not there. So when he analyzed and did a survey, this was anonymous, obviously, he couldn't reveal all the sources, but he did talk to a lot of authors who did research publications, reviews, and editorials in very prominent journals, and he found that there were many honorary authors, much more than ghosts, okay? So it's 19% versus 10%. And they were more prevalent in the review articles and the editorials than in the research articles. So we're talking about the 10 to 20% of all articles are considered problematic in the area of authorship, okay? So when you consider an honorary author, obviously you can't do that by the rules and regulations now, but actually having included honorary authors diverts the credit from the actual author who did all the work, okay? Because sometimes these honorary authors are better well known, have a stronger scientific reputation, and they get all the glory, okay? So beware of that. So until 1983, the whole scientific community was a little bit laissez-faire about the attitude about this. And they didn't care, they ignored it, it's not a problem, who cares? It's up to the author to fight between them. But then one thing happened from 1975 to 72, a young investigator, Dr. Jay Darcy from Emory University, published over 20 very highly quality peer-reviewed manuscripts in high-impact medical journals, including the New England Journal of Medicine, and even more abstracts at meetings. Guess what? NIH caught up to him, and they concluded an investigation finding data falsification, and by June of 1983, he had to publish a letter retracting all his articles because they contained inaccurate and fabricated information. This is a shock to the scientific community. And what did the co-authors do? They said, oh, we didn't really examine the manuscripts. They claimed they didn't even know they were co-authors. And they claimed it was benign neglect, okay? And they shouldn't be accountable to his transgressions. He had to take all the brunt and all the shame of it. But actually, nobody believed them. This benign neglect, as the king says, we can't use it for everything, okay? It's no longer tolerated. So that's what came, because it was not tolerated, it couldn't be ignored. The committee began to call, led by AMA, the committee, and led by a very prominent scholar of that time, Dr. E. Huth. And this is what's considered the Huth Committee principles. They decided that they were going to design a series of specific criteria to assist the decision making when you write up, you decide on who you're going to be your co-authors. So they encompass 5 specific areas that we're going to look up now. Number 1, public responsibilities for the content. This addressed what the co-authors did. It's no longer ethically acceptable to claim lack of knowledge of the content of a publication if it was to be found falsified later on. So each author has to be able to participate sufficiently in the work to be able to take responsibility for its content. Okay, so they have to be able, each author has to be able to defend the content, all the data, all the methods, all the conclusion, all the interpretation. And then if something goes wrong, they have to publicly concede the errors and try to explain the nature and the extent of these errors. So no longer benign neglect, okay? Number 2, specific active participation. Each author should have contributed to one or more of the process involved in a manuscript publication. So the 3 important steps are the design, the conception of the work, the analysis, the interpretation of the data, or both. Drafting, revising the article is for critically important content, and the final approval of the version to be published. Okay, so this includes forming the hypothesis, the question, getting the data, collecting it, or the evidence, and critically analyzing the evidence. So all of the authors, since they have to really ensure the validity of the arguments and the conclusion, they have to be able to defend this article as true and as accurate, okay? So that puts a stronger burden on each author you're going to include in your manuscript. Number 3 is readily identifiable contribution. Each part of the content has to, and each step must be attributable to at least one author of the 3 steps that were mentioned prior to on the previous slide. And then each element must be publicly defensible, okay, to be able to defend all the conclusions. And so here, when we say those people involved in statistical evaluation, if that was important or was critical to a main conclusion, they should be included as authors. Okay, so we can't leave the statisticians, behind the curtains. No, they really come up front, and they're important. If that was critical, the information given was critical to the conclusions. And number 4 is conceptual appreciation for the message. This excludes the individual who participated but did not satisfy what was mentioned in Principle 1. So people who came along or volunteers who helped out in the data collection but really don't understand what the conceptual issues are, they can't really know enough to publicly defend, so they should not be co-authors, okay? You have to recognize them in other formats like acknowledgments. Or those people who generated data or gathered evidence but don't understand what's going on, their intellectual substance or significance of the data also should not be included as co-authors. Number 5 is the intellectual breadth of the contribution. So those people who came along and said, okay, let me look at your study, I'll read your manuscript, oh, it's pretty good, I'm going to critique it, I want to be author, just like Maria was telling me. No, because they didn't contribute to the work. Okay, people who came up just did the data collection, of course not. People who, as I said, who were not really engaged in the project. And then some authors that maybe they don't really want to be considered as an author. They did a little bit, but they're normally responsible for everything. Use them in acknowledgement, don't place them as a co-author, because one of the responsibilities as an author is that you have to be able to defend it and be responsible for it. So even if you want to put them in acknowledgement, you have to get their request their permission in advance and to include them there, okay? You're going to be mentioning them, you're going to say thank you to them, but get the permission first. So when all of these principles came out, all the top journals said, yes, we were going on board with that, especially Nature, Academic Medicine, Medical Education, JAMA, and New England Journal of Medicine. And here's the website. You can look it up where they voice their criteria. And actually, most top journals require in the cover letter you send to the editor, really explain how did each and every one of them contribute, okay? they could have contributed in one way, other people could have done the manuscript, but you have to really designate who did what. And the International Committee on Medical Journal Editors also issued the uniform requirements. So this is the website, you can look it up. And basically they're saying that all people who are authors should qualify, and those who all qualify should be listed. And just by gathering the funds or data or general supervision by themselves do not justify authorship. So this is eliminating all those grandfather clauses, in the past where I'm the chief of whatever service, I'm going to get on the papers. No, you didn't do anything, so you're not worthy of being on there, okay? And someone's smiling because they know that happens, and it still does sometimes here, huh? But anyway, so NIH also adopted the Youth Committee and in these guidelines saying that also individuals who assist in the research bucket because they gave encouragement or advice or gave space or financial support or gave you a reagent, no, you can't grant them authorship. Gave you patient materials, I'm going to give you my clinic. No, that's not sufficient to be an author. You have to do more to become an author on that paper. Okay, so when you decide the order of the co-authors, this is also an issue, right? First author, usually you obviously should be the person who made the major significant contribution and was intimately involved in the writing and the critical review. The last author is usually reserved for the most senior, the person who supervised the research or gave all the necessary resources. The corresponding author usually is the first or the last, but not always. It could be someone in between or the next to the last. When you have a conflict on who should deserve the first authorship, sometimes a useful way to do it is adding a footnote, un asterisco, after the names, and say, but both John Doe and X. Smith have contributed equally to the work presented in this manuscript. Okay, so it sort of like evens it out when you look at that in terms of of quality of work, in terms of having the honor. The second, although listed as the second, is considered first when you during academic revision, so it's just as good. But when it's in PubMed, it would appear as the second author. But but still, it's better than being just a second. It's sort of like almost a twin from the first. Other positions like the third, fourth, and fifth, there's really not much of an impact in these positions. So don't fight over I should be number 4, not number 5, and who cares? Nobody really looks at the people in the middle anyway. And if there are like 15 names, who cares who's in the middle? Nobody really looks at it. Be honest, you really don't. So, but if you need to fight for one, be maybe the second or the next to the last. Those are better positions. Okay, so someone tried to decide, so maybe let's find a method to determine the order of author, and this Ahmed in Family Medicine, he published like a semi-quantitative method, and what he did was he assigned different points to each category for each author, like 1 for minimal, 2, 3 for more than minimal, and 5 for significant points, and all the different categories listed here, which is all the basic components of a manuscript. And then if you add them up and tabulate it, you'll probably, with the numbers, decide what's the best order for the authors. This is a practical method for resolving potential conflicts. And probably, if math really doesn't lie, so you can talk about different aspects. But if the numbers add up, those are the numbers, and this is the way it goes. So that's one way to probably resolve a conflict if you have any in your future publications. So, speaking about this, the co-authorship issues really are unlikely to be fully resolved. So this is an ongoing problem. Citations in PubMed regarding co-authorships have been increasing. Before the 1983 incident, there were less than 100 annually. But as you see, they continue creeping up. So it's something that irritates almost everybody. It's a very sore subject. Best way to do it is to clarify the issues up front before you initiate a collaborative project. Because sometimes you invite someone on board, let's collaborate in this, and you don't speak about this, which is this is the dirty stuff. Nobody likes to talk about this, but you have to. Because maybe that person is thinking, oh, I'm going to be the first author, and you don't think he really deserves it, so say it beforehand. And if you're going to use a quantitative method, so say it and state it. Okay, people who come in afterwards that the project initiated, really explain to them, this is what we agreed upon, this is what's going to go, and how are we going to just change it all up. If we're going to change it, everybody has to be on board. So you really have to talk to everybody. Listen, I'm bringing in this person who has expertise in such and such area, and then this is our agreement, and how we're going to change, how are we going to insert this person in our authorship order, okay? So this really helps when it comes time to write and submit the manuscript, because all of the authors really have to be aware of what you're submitting, and they have to sign off. Sometimes some of them, you really have to, each and all of them have to sign off on them and say, yes, I'm aware, and sign out this, thing that I agree with everything that was written here, and I will accept responsibility for all of this context, okay? So you can't really sort of like put people there and they don't know that they're there. You really have to talk about this. Okay, so basically, every and each one of them should establish their personal guidelines that justify co-authorship. Because if you are being invited to be involved in a concept, and in a manuscript, and you weren't really involved in conception, research, design, or interpretation to warrant co-authorship, you should be honest to yourself. Because this is something that happened in the, past errors really teach us the way to really respond in the future. So this was something that was quite notorious. There were, at a time, and in 78, there was a big issue about the platelet monoamine oxidase levels in schizophrenic patients, and so this was in vogue. And then came out two different manuscripts, actually in the same month, January of 78. One of them said, are paranoid schizophrenics biology different from other schizophrenics? And they found no difference in the levels of monoamine oxidase in the platelets. But then at the same time, in another journal, the American Journal of Psychiatry, the first one was in New England Journal of Medicine, the American Journal of Psychiatry, other authors wrote that they found they could be able to distinguish the paranoid schizophrenics from the other schizophrenics based on the levels of the levels in the platelets of monoamine oxidase. So, you figure, okay, two different journals, they're saying different things, that happens, right? But the funny thing is, extremely unusual, and what really impacted negatively was the senior authors in both of these manuscripts were the same. So Murphy and Wyatt, apparently they were invited in because they were, very highly recognized, and they didn't even know what was going on in the manuscript, and they signed off saying that they agreed with everything. So either it's good, it's right, or it's wrong, but you can't be both. So that was a big oops in the history. And history, if you don't learn from past mistakes, you will never become better in the future. So beware of this. Okay, so every author has to be aware and agree with the information presented in the manuscript. Okay, so now, this is giving all the words of wisdom beforehand. We're going to start talking about the preparation of biomedical manuscript for publication. Okay, so any questions so far, or should we just go on? Okay, so within the preparation, we'll start with the conceptual framework. Let me just say beforehand. So we're going to start off with a couple aspects of this, and then the second part, we're going to go into more detail of the introduction and methods and all the other parts. As you saw in the information it was given out, it's a 3-part series, okay? So the framework, the key elements needed to achieve the objectives is, first of all, I spoke to you about time. They must be identified every day, and use it when you have full productivity and highest priority can be anticipated. Your instructions to author that Maria said, you have to really keep an up-to-date copy. Look it up, because it has a lot of information about how many words you can use in a title, how many words in an abstract manuscript, how you're going to cite the the references and what other supplemental information you can add. And if it's a randomized clinical trial, go to the concert statement because it gives you a checklist and a flow diagram that what all the issues that you have to consider addressing for the design, conduct, analysis, and interpretation because they're really looking into that you really follow every step completely, okay? So make sure that you have the the hard copy or the electronic copies of the primary data to have it with you. And then make sure that you get a full knowledge of the relevant literature. Okay, so really keep up with that. Do your homework first and then keep up with that area that you're looking at. Know that what is the overall goal of the manuscript. So it's a simple way to address it is that will it answer a question or will it solve a problem? And then write initially from the beginning, the first step is your single sentence take home lesson. I'll say the single essential piece of new knowledge that I want all the readers of the manuscripts to come away with is this. So what you write after this, it should be the answer to the question or the solution to the problem. Okay? Obviously, know the structure of the manuscript. Most of them are the basic IMRD format with the introduction, materials, methods, results, and discussions. But I've seen more recent journals, they sort of like switch it around and change it around something. But be sure what is the format you need to continue, and then all the other components you need to add. Remain enthusiastic. I know it becomes drag sometimes when you have obstacles, and then when when you're trying to submit and the button doesn't work, you start hitting it. But try to remain calm and focus on the ultimate goal. What is it? That have your manuscript accepted and have the readers understand what is your take-home message. That's basically it. You want everybody to know your story. You spent time and effort in a story, and you want everybody to know what you have to say, right? Okay, so I'll leave you with Dr. Gonzalez now here, and she will talk specifically more about the title, keywords, and abstract. So thank you.
So coming back and repeating something that Dr. Hellman just said, please read the instructions to authors beforehand. There is nothing more frustrating than you having a draft and then realizing that you have 3,000 extra words that what they require. And that's extra time you'll spend on it, and you'll be really fed up trying to make it into the size they require. So general tips for the title and abstract. This is one thing to remember. Both the title and abstract are your presentation card. These will ultimately guide the people that want to read your work to reading your work. So it should generate interest. It should convey what actually was studied. And it can be the first and the only part that a person will ever read if they don't have access to the journal to read the entire paper. Also, it should be specific and concise. You want to have enough to describe the contents of your manuscript, to highlight why it's important, why is it novel, and to relate your major findings. Also, keywords. I think that now I appreciate even more the importance of keywords. Keywords are what will ultimately help readers find your papers. It's what the databases use to index your manuscript. And you should really take the time to think them through so the people you want to read your manuscript will be able to find it. So the title is ultimately the key to success to any published manuscript. This is the one that will draw your audience in to actually click on it and read your abstract. The purpose of the title, too, is to establish the existence of what you actually publish, to help your readers find the publication, and to attract other potential readers. There are three types of titles, and the type of title you will choose will ultimately be dictated by what you're reporting. In terms of indicative titles, these are the most common titles. These are titles that actually explain what was done. Here we have an example of an indicative title that says levels of systematic inflammatory mediators following administration of antibiotics in patients with colorectal cancer. So you know what they measured, you know which patients were seen. An example of an informative title is a title that you actually specify several things. In this title, you're actually saying which antibiotics were evaluated and also which inflammatory mediators were evaluated. Then you have the questioning title. This is one where you want to sort of make your research sound sexy, exciting. But both the questioning and the informative title will be dictated on what you're showing. If you're showing things that have been previously reported, the answer you're going to get from your reader is, so what? So if an informative title is HPV causes cervical cancer, and that's the title of your paper, everybody knows that HPV causes cervical cancer, so that's not really a title you should use. And for the questioning title, you should really use it if it goes against what's already been published, and that's what will read will make the reader actually want to read your entire paper. So in terms of generating potential titles, in the book that we referenced and we used to make these presentations, they gave us a real insight on how to do it. I've never done it this way, but I think it's an ideal way to do it. You're going to go to instructions to authors first to see how many characters and or words you can include in your title. And that's your startup point. Your second point is you're going to think about 12 to 15 key terms that describe your research. These terms should be so specific that when you read them, you sort of get an idea of what was studied, even though they're not put together in an actual title. You should never use acronyms in a title unless they're very well-known acronyms. An example would be TNF-alpha, which was used in the previous slide. That's a well-accepted acronym because it's used constantly. And what you do with these keywords is you make rearrangements of them. You make different titles based on these keywords. And you can make a list of 8, 10, and start to play with them. And what things should you also consider? Do you have specific populations, specific models, anything else you should put in there? Once you have a list of your titles, it's very intuitive when you show it to a colleague, because if you're involved in the project, sometimes some of the details you're so familiar with that you think everybody knows them. But when you share with somebody that's not as familiar with your work, they could give you input on towards what title is the most exciting and the one that actually conveys what was done in this research. So this is an idea of sort of how you can make a title better. So this is an example of a really poor title, Mouse Courtship Behavior, that says nothing about what's actually being discussed in the paper, and it's way too general. So in this second title, the effects of estrogen on the no-stitch courtship behavior of mice, it sort of gives you an idea of what specific behavior was being used, a modifying agent, estrogen, and the experimental organism, which was the mouse. A better title would be Estrogen Stimulates the Intensity of No-Stitch Courtship Behavior in Mice. And sort of these block by block, step by step changes you can make to all of your titles that you come up with. When I talked about a specific population, if you're looking at something in a specific population, definitely go ahead and put it in there. If you have a case control study, seroprevalence of H. pylori, a case control study. If you have a population-based study, and all of the previous literature does not have a population-based study, you definitely want to consider putting those keywords in your title. It'll definitely attract readers to your work, and it'll make it more visible. In terms of keywords, as I already mentioned, they're used to index manuscripts, and it enhances the possibility of readers that are searching general terms to come across your manuscript. In what I actually didn't have in mind is that some terms are not actually in the medical subject heading database, and therefore are keywords that don't work, basically. So before you choose your keywords, you should always do a quick search in the MeSH database and ensure that they're there, because then they will work. When you're deciding on which keywords you're going to use as keywords and not in the title, you could always delete the ones in the title unless you want to keep them. But if you keep different keywords, you maximize the opportunity you may have for a reader to find your work. At the end of the day, you want to have at least 4 to 6 keywords submitted when you submit your manuscript. Another important aspect of your publication will be the abstract. The abstract is key for drawing in the reader to read your manuscript. It's what appears in databases. It's basically your presentation card. It'll be a succinct overview of what was published. It should be self-contained. A person that reads your abstract should understand what you actually were investigating, what your main findings were. You should always emphasize the significance of what you were doing in terms of your research. It also should be written in a way that is understandable to anybody, not only experts in your field. And it should be written in past tense. The only exception is the conclusions. Conclusions could be in present tense. Otherwise, everything has to be in past tense because it's something you did in the past. You should only use well-recognized acronyms and should never include citations. This is actually something I found online, and though it's sort of funny, it's sort of how you organize an abstract. There is a preconceived order on how you write an abstract. The parts of the abstract are the background, which introduces the general topic. What is the problem? What is the epidemiology? What are the people? You should always highlight the importance of your study. You're studying an important problem. Then the background, after background, you should include your aim or hypothesis. What was the purpose of this study? What did you expect to uncover with your experiments? What was your hypothesis? You briefly describe the methods generally, and you can include the statistical analysis used briefly. The results summarize the key results, and the conclusion summarizes the significance and impact of the findings. You want to place it in a broader context. How does your work advance the field? What are the possible implications of your work in the future? And that could be your end, what they call a strong finish. You want to finish your abstract with a strong finish that actually shows how your work impacts the field. There's 2 types of abstracts. I included 2 examples here. No need to read them. I just want you to actually look at them overall. In the left, you see an unstructured abstract. It has all the parts that the abstract should have. They're just not divided. Rather, the structured abstract, which was originally designed for clinical trials to ensure clarity, and just by looking at it, you know in which section you'll find exactly the information you're looking for. More and more journals are now preferring the structured abstract. If the journal requires this type of abstract, that will be specified in instructions to authors. The subheadings in the structured abstract will also differ according to the journal, but these are the main ones used. Also, there are journals that do not specify the type of abstracts they want. They have manuscripts that have unstructured versus structured abstracts. I would recommend that you always go for the structured abstract. It conveys your work more clearly, and it's easier for the reader to follow. So in terms of how to write an abstract, the easiest way to write an abstract is to write a structured abstract. Even if it's at the end you'll have an unstructured abstract. Why? Because it'll make you think more logically of your work and how to convey it more clearly. In terms of the amount you will write, it will also be dictated to the instruction to authors. It'll tell you the word count. but generally you'll write 2 sentences per subheading. 2 sentences for the introduction, 2 sentences for the aims, results, conclusions, and so on. So what do you do if you have an unstructured abstract and that's what's required? Simply erase the subheadings and read over the abstract and edit so it naturally flows. That's one of the advantages of an unstructured abstract. You don't need it to flow because each subheading closes out what you're talking about. In an unstructured abstract, you want the reader to follow a natural flow when they're reading, not to come to abrupt stops and switch what you were talking about. And that's pretty much the end of our talk today. I don't know if any of you have any questions. Feel free to ask us anything. I hope it will help you write better abstracts, better manuscripts, and choose better journals. Any questions?
Make sure that you signed, everyone needs to be signed up top, you know, the assistance list, because based on that list, we will send out the PDF for you. So if you didn't sign, please do it. And then you will be sent an evaluation, right? Online. Please fill it out because we need to justify why we're here, why we're taking our time to do it. And I hope you all learned a little bit and enjoyed the conference, okay?
For more reference, this is the book we used for the presentation, and we have additional slides from other presentations that we use, at least I do, that I can make available to you if needed. Thank you.